Thanks, Cam, for coming on the podcast. We're going to get stuck into a lot of things around critical thinking. That's the main reason why I want to talk to you and why I feel like people should listen to what you have to say when it comes to critical thinking in strength and conditioning, and why not taking everything as gospel is so important in our space, and just looking at the facts and trying to at least come up with a hypothesis on why we think something's working and then going from there, rather than the sports science route where we're just getting buried in the evidence and we're finding it hard to test and try our own theories. So before we get into all that good stuff, if you don't mind sharing with us your backstory and how you got to the position you're in now as a strength and conditioning coach in this field.
What if I say I do mind? No. The thing with
I mean, well, we can skip the backstory. I just read Stephen King's book and he said the backstory needs to be short. So
yeah, that's the thing. I just worry that I've been on a few podcasts of late, and I'm like, the backstory I think just kind of takes away from it. So I have condensed it down a good bit. So let's
let's give it elevator pitch then.
Elevator pitch as much as I possibly can. So I come from a family of a sports mad family. So my mother was an international sprinter. My aunt was an international sprinter. My cousin is an international sprinter. He actually sprinted in Tokyo. My dad played Gaelic football and hurling. And the road that the family home was off is named after my grandfather for services to sport. And I think there's something like 5-6 strength and conditioning coaches or sports science related degrees in the close to kind of close family. So a family of coaches obsessed with all things sport and coaching. I used to joke when I was in sports science that I had a library of coaching books, and I fucking do, and DVDs and VHSs. So ended up in sports science selfishly to become a better athlete. I was already kind of hypercritical of it because I had been hoodwinked by so many things before that, or in and around the same time, like the paleo diet. So I wasn't always kind of a critical thinker, if you will. But I saw how data could be manipulated to make someone believe in pretty much everything. And I arrived at those kind of fads, if you will, but through recommendations from people I would have respected that had backgrounds in science. And I was like, oh, they definitely know what they're doing. And now I look back at that and I'm like, wow, how it would be impressive to miss more. So I was very kind of skeptical from day one. I remember asking questions during my sports science degree, like basic questions of like, why are we worried about this when some of the stuff that would need to be prerequisites for it aren't taken care of? Like year one, where we were talking about periodization, I was like, why are we worried about like how we're planning our year of training for non-strength sport athletes in the gym who cannot do any of the exercises that are on any of these program templates that we're using as examples. If you can't do 1 rep, why would you do 4 sets of 10 and so on? So I was like asking these kind of questions, and they wouldn't really be answered. I thought I was being dismissed. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was asking questions that someone else hadn't asked before, but I can't imagine that either because it seems so simple to me. At the same time, I got into CrossFit. Similarly, I was like very skeptical. I had this sports science part of my brain that was telling me this is very wrong, but then my experience was completely different to it. And then I was in this weird space between, I'd say, real CrossFit in the early 2010s and not real CrossFit where I was, where they were hypercritical of quote unquote real CrossFit, saying that it was inappropriate. Went down the OPEX or the OPT back then rabbit hole there, training think tank. So it was a much more thoughtful process when it came to CrossFit. Ended up getting my level 1 on coaching in a CrossFit gym. I got a full-time coaching gig straight out of a sports science degree, which is kind of unheard of, and relative to what I would have got working in pro sport, which would have been the dream back then. It was a better salary. It was still a horrendous salary. You couldn't live off it. So I was like, what's the deal here? Spent some time working in a physiotherapy clinic as well. Similar things. I was like, I don't think that this actually pans out. Reducing injury down and so on, reducing training down as well. I'm like, that's not the case. But again, some of the evidence would contradict that with the caliber of athlete that was coming through the doors. I'm talking about like Olympic gold medalists and some of the most famous athletes in the world. And then I kind of had enough of in-person full-time coaching back in 2018 because of broken promises and not seeing it as a viable long-term career as an employee, if you get me. And online coaching just came to be as a necessity. I was living in Dublin, and then I had people wanting me to coach them who weren't in Dublin. And I was like, well, we can do this remotely. I just got to be smarter of what I give you. I got to get feedback from you. And then I went completely online, I think in 2018. By the end of 2018, I had finished the job. I disappeared to Asia. I was never coming home. Ended up in the Philippines, spent a year on the island, on a specific island. Loved it. Never felt as at home in my life, to be honest with you. Completely different way of life, relaxed. I'm the most highly strung person I know. So it was something that I kind of needed. Then COVID happened, came home with the intention of going straight back out as soon as COVID finished in a couple of months. As you know, it wasn't a couple of months. Went back playing competitive sports, tore my ACL, LCL, had a few fractures in my leg. So then that would delay my return no matter what. But I managed that myself. And then like a year to the day, tore my labrum in my hip, ruptured my psoas bursa or something. And kind of repeated that process of just like doing it myself. And then I suppose here I am. I ended up connecting with Chris Speed, Angus Bradley, Matt Watson, and now I'm just kind of trying to take advantage of those opportunities. And this wouldn't have happened only for coming home from COVID. So that's why I'm here. And that's as short as I can make it.
That's a dope backstory, man. How does someone with so much sprinting talent lose to Angus Bradley in a sprint, though?
Oh man.
Okay. Anyway, while you ponder that, and while the audience thinks about it, thinks about that, do you feel like
I was so cocky going into that?
Yeah. Do you feel like that initial approach, like you wanting to get into strength and conditioning, do you think that made you improve your performance as an athlete? Like you said, there was like a selfish pursuit to learn more to be a better athlete. Did that actually happen?
No, it did the opposite. I did the thing. I think that's why I'm so anti sports science right now. Like I'm kind of parroting a phrase saying sports science isn't a real science, because holy God, the conclusions we have drawn from so we got bad questions, worst study design, data, gymnastics with the data, and then we've got conclusions that I just can't fathom. I can't understand how we've arrived at them. So I did the trap bar deadlifting, the landmine push press or jerks or whatever you want to say, the rear foot elevated split squats for sets of 8 with 20 kilo dumbbells, because that's all anybody ever does. And yeah, it did nothing. It made my performance worse. I was anytime I was on the field, so Gaelic football and hurling were my sports, I never saw a transfer. And that's one thing that people who work with me always say. Like I'm kind of waiting for that moment as well. I'm waiting for the penny to drop, because what I'll give them is so different to what they've gotten before in the past. I'm waiting for this moment, this little text message to come through. Is like, I feel fast and springy. And I'm like, yeah, you do. Because like I'm not driving fatigue. I'm like, you're just practicing being more explosive, more athletic all of the time. And you're building this massive bank of evidence that you can generate a lot of force, you can accept a lot of force, you can redirect a lot of force. And yeah, I've swam completely upstream, I think, when it comes to the status quo in terms of what you should do.
So what does that look like on paper? So we switched to trap bar jumps and like RPE 5 Bulgarians, maybe not even RPE 5. And then now you've got them doing these other things where they are feeling like they're more athletic and they are expressing and developing these skills. Is this still like, what does that look like for you? What does the structure look like?
I think it depends on the goals. And it's not all bad either. I don't want to sound as bitter as I do, because I know I sound bitter when I speak about sports science. The whole bilateral deficit thing is a good example where I realized very quickly that sets of 8 with 20 kilo dumbbells doesn't go very far at all. So I just took my lunge and split squat as far as I could take them back then. And then that's when I first started to see some carryover. I thought I couldn't squat until until I tore my ACL, genuinely. So the majority of my strength work until then was single leg squatting, and it allowed me go a lot further than I probably should have been able to with that. Like I was lunging like 140 kilos back when I couldn't front squat over 120, or I couldn't back squat. I couldn't back squat even close to that either, like the 140. I did 120 lunges for like sets of 8 on each leg, and I wouldn't front squat 121. My clean was 124 and my power clean was 125. All these things just didn't make sense, and a lot of my ratios still don't make sense. Like I cleaned 143 with a 150 back squat. Doesn't make sense. So to go back to what it looks like, I try to keep the goal. A session will have usually one goal and one goal only. That could be something like total body for a Gen Pop client, but we're talking about athleticism and sports performance here. Usually how I start people off is I will have 3 goals, because I'm dealing with multi-directional athletes. So the 3 goals are top speed, acceleration, and change of direction. And it's really easy to see how you would come to those categorizations or classifications. Top speed, you're talking about how the displacement of your center of mass up and down. So it's relatively short ranges of motion, and we will turn the dials up on each of the components of that all the way to the top, or as high as we possibly can, which means the other dials come down. So if we're looking at force, that means we are going to move through shorter ranges of motion. For example, we're going to do lower rep sets, and I will see female athletes do up to 200 kilos from a quarter squat from pins, Anderson quarter squat from pins. Then in terms of speed, the kind of the other end of that spectrum, it will be pogos. So you're like, that's essentially the same movement pattern, apart from you're getting to use your Achilles in your pogos, obviously. And then in the middle, what I want to have is, or I'd like to have, is a power jerk or a push press. A lot of people can't power jerk at the start, at least, but that's kind of the end goal. The end goal is some form of a heavy quarter squat, and that won't be there all of the time either. Like once you've developed it, you can kind of keep it there, and oftentimes we will do it as a warm-up. Then we'll go into our push press power jerk variation. Then we'll go on to some plyos in that. That might change to single leg stuff. It might change to a hop and so on. Acceleration would be greater ranges of motion, relatively slow. So if it's greater ranges of motion, relatively slow, and we're thinking about acceleration, we're going to move from a dead stop as well. So ideally from pins again, or a pause front squat, for example. And if you contrast acceleration to top speed, you've got lower ground reaction forces, longer ground contact times. So I'll bias plyos in that as well. So I'll use more deep tier plyos here. I'll maybe use weighted plyos very rarely. I usually just use weighted plyos to teach arm action, and then change of direction is the other side of the coin for acceleration. So the end goal is that you'll usually have a top speed session, and you'll have a change of direction and acceleration session, and you'll usually have the change of direction stuff at the start and then your acceleration stuff. The top speed session, you can see, moves from slow to fast, and I found that works very well, which is the opposite of what we're told to do. Change of direction looks a bit like it. That's much more variable what change of direction looks like, but you'll have more multi-directional plyos. Again, similar. You've got deep tier plyos, and then in that acceleration day, you'll have more jump training rather than plyos as well. One of the things with change of direction that I've been playing around with a lot has been split variations of the Olympic lifts. And it's not about that. Like, the Olympic lifts aren't about the things that are part about the Olympic lifts. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but if we look at a plyo, a hop, a bound, in particular hops and bounds, and that foot contact, you've got you've got how fast your foot will contact the ground, or how aggressively you can whip that down. You see people landing on their forefoot as well, like dramatically on their forefoot. That's not what we're chasing. We're trying to take advantage of the body's natural plyometric reflex. So we want to have those toes up, and people don't know what that feels like. So I found that a heaving split clean, for example, jerk variations, split snatch, all that stuff gives people that reference frame, and maybe we'll pair an easier hop, so a light or medium tier plyo with that, and then after those, they'll then do their ping tier plyos. And I think you can touch these extremes all of the time. It's just about the dose. You might do 3 contacts, 2 contacts, and that's your ping for the day for now. But then ideally, once you've developed, you have that reference frame, you know what to do, the skills have trended upwards for a while, you don't need to do as much of it. So that's kind of what the system looks like for any of the multi-directional athletes that I'll work with.
How did you arrive at going from slow to fast? I know, like, for a lot of people, it's like that in a sense is like mind blown. He just broke the model. But yeah, how did you arrive at
that? So one is probably one of my most toxic traits of just being like very disagreeable. But no, the other was experience. So there's 2 things that would color that. First would be experiences with overuse issues like patellar tendinopathy in both knees, and more often than not, it's the rate of loading. So if you look at the traditional rehab model for that, you've got isometrics and isotonics. So you're going from not moving to moving slowly. So that kind of made sense there. And then tearing my ACL. I've also realized that I've kind of connected some dots that I don't know if they do connect as well, with the trade-off between accuracy and speed. If you move too fast, maybe you'll miss. So if you just do it slowly, your chances are you're going to be more accurate. And I think training or rehab is just moving from easy to hard. So what's easier than moving fast? Moving slowly. What's easier than moving slowly? Not moving. So if we're talking about purely load, your heaviest lifts might be your isometrics. Your next heavy might be partials, and then your faster will be your plyos or whatever. And then I use so much overspeed stuff as well. Band resisted plyos. I don't do any band assisted plyos anymore. Thanks for shattering that world for me, Matt Watson. But yeah, I think it just makes intuitive sense to go from slow to fast. There's so many ways we can go from slow to fast. I'm not talking about slowing down the movements either, because I think that's not it. If you worry about how something looks by slowing it down, you're missing the forest for the trees. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we make with how we approach a lot of our strength work. So think about, I laugh on Twitter every single day. Every single day, I laugh when I see.
I have to get off. I hate it. I hate it at the moment. It's just like so dumb.
if you want to feel good about yourself as a coach, go on Twitter.
Sign up.
Um, because you've got the alphabet soup sports science brigade, and they're talking about, oh yeah, I'm doing this bench press program, like I'm so proud of where I'm going, and they're what they've said doesn't match up what they're doing in the video. They're talking about like perfect technique and movement over maxes and all this BS. It's going to be like a 5-second eccentric and there's a 3-second pause. I'm like, aren't you using this to improve performance? And then also, when I see that video, your hips are through the fucking roof. They're nowhere near that bench. If you're going to parrot things about technique being king, keep your fucking arse on the bench.
Yeah.
Do it as it's described.
A lot of people just move really badly. Like that's another thing. Like a lot of coaches, I feel like my lifting, like when I'm on point, I feel like my lifting looks good. But there are some people who put up videos and you're just like, I don't even like putting up plyos because I didn't even want Matt to see them. But yeah.
Oh, I don't put up most of my because I don't want Matt to see them. Like, and I've told him this as well. Every now and again, I'll put up a screenshot or a slow-mo video of a rep, a singular rep, because I've made one rep look good. But if we think about their arguments as well, like we can just turn those arguments around. That's a really good example of they're talking about technique and developing technique with these slow eccentrics and pauses when they're looking for general transfer. And then if we think about specificity, they're slowing down the eccentric so much and pausing for so long that they're getting less out of a movement that they could be getting a lot more from. So if they could speed up the eccentric and turn it around faster, that will bring so much more. Could be more load on the bar. And it just gives you a greater bandwidth of other exercises that you can then use. Like your ballistic push-ups. I'm not going to call them plyo push-ups, just in case Matt listens.
In case Dad listens.
Yeah, so I figured out, I've not figured out, but right now where I'm at is if I'm trying to develop maximal transfer and maximal gains in physical qualities, which I don't really believe in, that's another part. I am going to speed up the eccentric as fast as I can control, and I'm going to minimize any pause. I'm going to try to turn that around as fast as I possibly can, and it's helped dramatically with my bench in particular of late. Right now I'm benching practically every single day, and I'm just ironing out a few things. I'm putting in a stupidity buffer because I know that when I put this program out or I give it to people, they're not going to take the rest day, or they're going to build to a single more often than the program says, or they're going to use loads that are too heavy. And I don't want that to break them. So I'm going to have a bit of a buffer that will hopefully allow for some level of stupidity. I think that's what a lot of programs can miss.
Yeah, I'm just glad that you touched on that earlier, because I feel like we kind of do a similar thing. A friend of mine trained together, and we kind of do everything, I would say, like wrong, and we're like PB our jumps at the end of the session, or like when we shouldn't be doing it. And it just, yeah, it's awesome. It's good for people to see. And I feel like if more people had that approach where they didn't just accept it, and the whole like detraining with pauses, like you're just detraining your athletes, because then they don't really go as heavy. They're not really getting much out of it.
Yeah, and like there's so many ways that we could refute that argument of the order of the fastest thing needs to come first. It's the most demanding. If we mirror our training session to a training cycle, however long that training cycle or training block is, I don't like blocks either. You start off with less and you finish with more. Like you are going to a peak. So I think the training session should be probably the same, or maybe you peak in the middle depending on your emphasis, and then at the end you kind of come back down. And that's what it looks like for a lot of people at the start. Their front squats are so bad. I'm not saying that's not a slight at you as a person. It's just that that's your biggest limiter. Like my front squat is bad. That is the limiter for me. I'm lucky when I can front squat more than I can clean. So until I have a buffer between my front squat and my clean, that's where my efforts need to lie. So that's where my own program will that's what my own program will look like until that happens. So my program will peak in the middle at front squat, and then it will come back down as I work on my cleans. And I will constrain the load of my cleans, or cap the load of my cleans relative to whatever I'm front squatting at the moment. But to use their own arguments against them, they'll talk about things like PAP and potentiation. And we've seen this where heavy loads can then potentiate greater jump performance. And I had an aha moment. I was just demoing how to measure a jump without any equipment, only a camera. I was like, put a camera out, take note of the surroundings, how far you put the camera, make sure it's the same box, and just jump beside the box. But whenever I'm filming stuff for clients or for things like that, I'm usually just doing it in my rest periods. So I was doing my quarter squats, and I still remember this day because the first time I ever did 250 kilos, and it was a 7 centimeter jump. So I added 7 centimeters to my jump or more because I was using a camera. It's not very reliable. I just couldn't believe how much higher I could jump doing that. And then seeing how far I could, I'm now looking at that 250 partial front squat. I've since done 340, 350. And it's the same thing. I'm like, I can just jump higher pretty much immediately in the minutes afterwards. So it all works.
It all works. So how can someone develop the skills that you have now? How can someone get to the point where they can filter information like you do?
Talk to people that shatter your world consistently. But how do I filter my info? I think nowadays I look at the message, then I look at the assumptions that are underlying that message. And I'll also ask who benefits from this message and how. So oftentimes some of our standard operating procedures, for lack of a better word, we've done them that way because we've always done them that way. I'm like, that's not really a good argument. Or it's very clear that there's a lot of exceptions to the rule, and some of these exceptions to the rule are the best performers. It's the whole like power ends when the arms bend argument. They can be issues, but oftentimes it's not for that reason. If I give somebody the program I give somebody isn't the program they do, it's what they think I've communicated them to do. And oftentimes that's what it is. It's not the thing. Oh, bodybuilding's bad. That's something I saw on Twitter. I see it every day. It's like, stop giving your athletes bodybuilding work. I'm like, that's not the problem. Like, you can do an awful lot of bodybuilding work, and you probably should do a lot of bodybuilding work to build some muscle mass. It's when bodybuilding is the whole program. So bodybuilding isn't the problem. It's the dose, and then it's the why you're using those methods. Same thing with powerlifts, same thing with the Olympic lifts. Yeah, I think I've just learned to look at the message and then break that message down, see if there are any really obvious exceptions, and really successful ones, more successful ones than those who are parroting that message, or those who believe in that message the most. And then who benefits and how. Sometimes it can be just an insecurity thing. That's what I've realized a lot with coaches. It's insecurity. I think the thing with the trap bar is a great example. The trap bar, I think, is as popular as it is because it allows people to not learn how to coach the deadlift, which is the easiest lift to coach. We will then cherry pick research like McGill's stuff on pig spines, talk about strain on the lower back. And then we're like, but what is training? Training selective straining. So do we not want to strain our lower back? Do we not want to have a strong lower back? The same people will also part messages about the importance of full ranges of motion. Yet when we look at high handle trap bars, they allow us to move through a shortened range of motion with more load. You need more load on a trap bar to get the stimulus you're looking for. Trap bars are less common in gyms. So if you walk into any gym in the world, I'm going to bet my life on it. More often than not, there's going to be more straight bars than there are going to be trap bars. Then you've got to worry about the plates. If you only have bumper plates, and if you have big ass bumper plates, not comp bumper plates, you might not put on more than 160, 180 kilos. A lot of athletes will do that day one. So their heavy work is no longer heavy, and it's through a shortened range of motion. And it's because it's not heavy, they're moving fast and they could probably leave the ground. The local gym here, I don't trap bar deadlift. I never do anything with a trap bar. I'm actually buying one though. That's a funny contradiction here. I loaded up to a max. I did a trap bar deadlift on one leg, and I also jumped with it. I'm like, this is shit. So yeah, I think if you just look at the messages, look at who's parroting them, how they benefit from it, even if it is just from an insecurity perspective. And then the last one is probably get out of the world of training. Sports science isn't a real science. I think I've learned more from non-training sources, and it might be close to sports science. Psychology's been a big one, neuroscience, and not to go all Huberman, but yeah, and this is like really rudimentary understanding of certain things. From listening to people like John Kiley talk about the limitations of periodization. So yeah, I think that's probably how I've developed it. I think very deeply on things, and more so very frequently. I think I think a lot of it is just related to ADHD. So I got an ADHD diagnosis at the age of 30. I had so many questions about things, and my mind never shuts off. I say I'm the most highly strung person I know. So because my mind never shuts off and there's so many different trains of thoughts running at the same time, I think I just have a greater frequency of thought, that because I've got a greater frequency, there's probably more good thoughts in there, but there's a whole lot of terrible thoughts. There's a whole lot of terrible ideas that I've hashed out. I'm like, that was the dumbest thing you have ever done.
I feel like giving yourself the time and the opportunity to think deeply is probably where you've been able to innovate with your own coaching model and being able to come up with those ideas. Let's talk about those fountains of knowledge that you've been able to tap into, those other resources that maybe other people aren't getting into, those concepts in neuroscience, but even just understanding, if anyone's read Agile Periodization, just understanding the concepts in those books and how that idea came to be from how adaptive computer science needs to be and how it struggles with linear models, and how when we come to work with a highly adaptable human, how we're going to try and apply very linear models to them and then wonder why shit isn't working. So for you, Cam, what are some of the things that you've been tapping into that of recent that's allowing you to be more creative and come up with some different ideas? Not even different ideas, but maybe just refine the ones you're working on at the moment.
So there's kind of I think there's two parts to that. I think the first one is your one on periodization and kind of that, and Mladen or Kiley's approach to it. I think that kind of segues nicely into the second part as well. So if we think about the origins of periodization and some of the methods that have come from it, and we're going to go all the way to shock method, they're solutions to very specific problems that we've then just copied and pasted to our own specific, very individual context. And when we take solutions like that without making modifications to them, or without understanding the reasoning or rationale used behind them, we're not getting as much juice out of it as we could have. So if we look at, first of all, we had just overlaying like normal, like planning from another world onto training. So a training block is a month, and it's just a month because it's a month. So we realized that didn't really work. Then we kind of tried to, then I think they noticed something like, so this goes back to Russia, obviously, sorry. Sports science comes from Russia pretty much. They realized that the athletes, I think, were breaking down or not performing in the winter, which that's a water is wet observation. If you think about the environment in Russia, it's cold, it's dark, so less vitamin D, all that stuff. So they just gave them easier stuff in the winter. So if you think about your traditional periodization, you're using lighter loads, but you're just doing more reps. Then I think they put in UV lamps in their training hall, and that problem went away. So then there's a new model, and then fast forward to depth jumps and depth landings and a shock method. Think about that environment again. Think about how accessible or how many indoor facilities would have the facilities required to train a track and field athlete. And then how practical it will be to heat those facilities. I don't think it'd be very practical. So they needed to impart large stimulus to their athletes. So they figured out, well, if we just land from progressively higher heights and jump, it doesn't require any space in front. They can do this if they can't make it to the training facility because they're snowed in. And that's become our go-to plyos. And then from that, we've got our snap downs, our sticking all our landings, which is the complete opposite of what we want when we're thinking about actual sports performance. So yeah, I think we're copying pasting solutions without considering what those solutions were actually for and the constraints of it. And if you look at your own context and the limitations of your world, which is kind of the other stuff I've been talking about, or I've spoken to you before the podcast about, I've been putting together a resource for the mentorship and the mentorship component of the last seminar series on injuries and pain, and listening to Kylie talk about placebo and nocebo. One of the theories that might underpin this or might support it is from a guy, or popularized by a guy called Carl Friston, and it's predictive processing and the free energy principle. So what is it to be human? Like, what does your body care about the most?
It just wants to survive. Yeah, well, me, yeah, it just wants to keep going. Just it wants to live. Oh, well, I want to fucking lift weights, but yeah, I want to make it do things that it doesn't necessarily want to do, and it protests, but we make it work.
Yeah, so that's our number one thing. It's survival, and how we don't react to if we go by Friston's models, we don't react, we kind of pre-act. And this is the thing with placebo and nocebo. So we have an expectation about what's about to happen, and then our body responds accordingly. So we're constantly making these predictions that create the universe we live in, for example. And a lot like how we build and break down protein, we do the same with this universe. So we're constantly building this world based on our experiences and our beliefs. So, but if I was to make a prediction, what do I need to make a prediction?
You need information, you need inputs.
Yeah, so you need information, and specifically beliefs. But what if your beliefs are founded upon faulty assumptions? And what if these beliefs aren't at that conscious level? And that got me where I've ended up in a few different worlds or examples in the world. And it's been kind of frightening. And I can see massive parallels to the world of sports science or just coaching in general. A very good example is Yeonmi Park, the North Korean defector. And she talks about her time in North Korea. She didn't know what compassion was. She didn't know what love was. She didn't know what isolation was. She spoke about the true meaning of isolation. And she said, if you are isolated, you do not know that you are isolated. The true definition of isolation is not knowing. Because when she was in North Korea, she did not know she was isolated. She thought she was in the center of the universe. Kim Jong-un is seen as a god. He can read their thoughts. He is starving for the people. And it was only when she escaped that she realized, oh, wow. Then I ended up looking at some other communities where a woman was killed because they thought she was a witch and they ate her. And then they asked her how did it taste? Like, oh, the meat is good. I finished it all. There's another example in North Sentinel Island. So it's an indigenous tribe that's completely cut off from the modern world. But in the 1800s, British naval officer arrived to the island, kidnapped an elderly couple and some kids. The elderly couple got sick really quickly and died. He sent the kids back with gifts, but they didn't realize among those gifts was illnesses, which led to many other people dying. So he returned to the island, if that wasn't bad enough, to carry out research. And he was a weirdo. So he was taking pictures of their penises and stuff. Weird, really fucking weird, really fucked up shit. So now when anybody lands to that island, they're greeted with hostility. And some missionary, he arrived to the island. He was rescued the first time. He was told not to go back. He went back and they killed him. And then the last example is there's a video of a YouTuber who goes to he arrives to a village, a very remote village, and there's this young girl who sees a white man for the first time. And this is the complete opposite to what her whole worldview was. She panics, she freaks out. There's this white guy there, he's got some weird contraption in his hands, it's a camera. She runs away screaming. And her family members or friends, they run after her, reassure her it's all right, but she's screaming that it's going to eat me. It's going to eat me. She thinks the technology is going to eat her. She gets evidence that it doesn't eat her when she touches the power bank it is in the video. Then she's kind of is forced to go and interact with this scary white man. And it's really uncomfortable for her. You can see that the pendulum swinging from panic to, oh, this is okay. She's got all these contradictory things going on. Her loved ones are comfortable, they're laughing. So she knows that, oh, they won't, they wouldn't lead me astray. They won't let him eat me. And they're constantly saying this. It's like, if he tries to eat you, we'll beat him. If he tries to eat you, we'll beat him. She eventually touches his skin, and the kind of panic disappears. He returns to the village a year later, and because that was such an impactful experience for her, she remembers this. So she's no longer afraid. And what all of this is about is it's about removing uncertainty. So we want to connect dots. We want to provide a reason behind things. And it's just something we do as humans. So we're just managing threats for lack of better words. And if we can take that and then apply it to the world of kind of injury and many of the messages we get, we're confronted with a lot of messages with faulty beliefs underneath them. So how can we first become aware of some of these beliefs that are powering these expectations, and becoming conscious of them? Because most of them, we're not conscious of them. If you don't know you can take that a certain option is open to you, how do you take that option? There's some really good examples from athletes in particular. Kobe Bryant's probably the best one, where he ruptures his Achilles, and because his whole world is being Kobe Bryant and being the Mamba, he reaches down to his calf and tries to pull his calf back down to like reconnect his Achilles. That's unhinged to hear someone talk about that. And listen to the team doctor talk about it. He goes, "Can you just bring me into the back and like tape it up?" He's completely emotionless at this time as well. He's walking around with a ruptured Achilles. He tries to run on his heel, and he goes, "What if I just run on my heel?" Because he just wants to continue playing. But the doctor goes, "What I'll let you do is I'll let you take the free throws if you like," because he was fouled when he ruptured his Achilles. And he goes, "I'm taking them." So he goes up, takes the free throws. Again, emotionless, leaves the court. Wants to get operated on the next day, which isn't recommended, because if you think about an Achilles rupture is going to be bleeding, all that crack. Find someone to do it. His wife and kids come in, but before his wife and kids come in, he flips out. He releases the anger that's built up that he hasn't shown. And then as soon as his wife and kids come in, he's this beacon of calm, if you will. So the threat to his system and the threat to his world was he's no longer Kobe. He's no longer this indestructible competitive beast. And as soon as that threat had passed, the horrors of the injury kind of come to be. So that's part of it. Then a lot of the other stuff comes from a sports psychologist, Hugh Gilmore, and he's shattered a lot of the popular psychology of today, if you will, where it's the perfect mirror for training and nutrition with good and bad foods and good and bad emotions. We're conflating pleasurable with good or positive, or uncomfortable with negative. And because we attribute things to and connect these dots without rhyme or reason, we've set ourselves off on the wrong foot. There's this old psychology experiment from the 50s, I think it's Hyder and Simmel, where they play this animation of these shapes moving around on a screen, and they ask the research participants to explain what has happened. And people say, "Oh, this represents cheating in relationship. It's Romeo and Juliet. It's all this," but it's just shapes moving around on a screen. There's no rationale behind it. So we've connected these dots, and we've assign beliefs about it for no apparent reason. And then there's another one, Solomon and Ash, the line experiment, where they ask participants to match which line is to 3 different lines. And the more people that, so if it's just one-on-one, if it's me and you tell me that it's not that line, I'll argue and I'll hold the line. But the more people that argue against you, the more likely you are to conform to the group's belief, or what you're being told is true. It's kind of like gaslighting. So if those things are all true, and I don't know if they are, but for me, they align with my experiences in the world and the things that I believe. I think we've got a lot of questioning to do with pretty much everything we're exposed to.
There's a lot going into those 10-minute EMOM benches. There's a lot for those who are Cian's clients. There's so much has gone into that 15-minute EMOM. Do you not realize? Nah,
You've no
amazing.
idea. Like, it's mental.
Yeah, it's amazing when we start to break it down. And that's similar to how I started the handbook. And for me, I couldn't start something about strength and conditioning or about training without at least 15 or so pages just discussing how we view the world and these different kind of moral dilemmas. Some of them are, and how we kind of battle in our minds between certain like complementary pairs, whether it's like explore exploit is one that I like, and how people kind of argue between those two, or macro to micro, where, you know, those are just ways that we view a situation, but how ultimately, like you said, it comes back to contextual and conceptual knowledge that we've been fed through into that funnels into our belief systems. From there, those values are going to come out, and how we act on those are going to be our principles. And a lot of people have really shitty principles that are fed from really bad, like just really bad ideas.
Yeah, and then it's all about, it all goes back to those 2 principles of predictive processing and the free energy principle. And part of it is you're managing threats to be more efficient, to decide what resources you can release. So we'll see people with chronic pain who have tried everything: surgery, medication, exercise. They've tried everything. And then they go, this is a placebo. This does nothing. But it still has an effect, a positive effect. An injectable placebo has a greater effect than an oral placebo. So we have all these things that are happening that aren't conscious. So it's, where do we start? It's such a head fuck. Like, I don't know, like my head's just exploding, putting this resource together and putting the finishing touches on. I'm like, oh my God, why did I get into this? But it's amazing.
Is this meant to be out? Is this meant to be for the people who signed up to do the recent? Is this a coming one that you guys are working on, or is this the past one? Or is this
It's
like
the
a
past
download?
one.
Yeah.
The past one, but it supports everything that we went through in the seminar and in the pre-seminar content. And I think without going deeper into those greater concepts that are in other fields or closely related fields are necessary, because when I say something like, oh, perception is reality, you're like, yeah, cliche, move on. And you don't really believe it. But then when you see somebody who thinks they don't know that it's a dictator, they think that he's a god, that he can read your thoughts. That kind of changes things a little bit, I think. Knowing that your beliefs are what's most important, and most of these beliefs aren't conscious, you're not even aware of them. And if you don't have a word for something, you're kind of screwed. Like the whole love and compassion thing, Yeonmi Park would pass bodies in the street and feel no emotion, no compassion. But as soon as she learned about the word and the concept of compassion, now she feels lots of compassion. So yeah, I think that's that. Yeah, my head's still fried because there's so many dots connecting there.
What's one that you're working on connecting that you haven't connected yet?
Well, all of that. What am I working on to connect? Dots.
Something that the listeners can be left some homework for them.
Some homework for them. I'd say just look into Carl Friston, the predictive processing and the free energy principle. And you can simplify that of looking at your experiences and the evidence you have. So I call it the bank of evidence, and that's what you're doing with training. The greatest predictor of success is previous success. The greatest predictor of confidence is previous success. And then the second greatest predictor of success, I think, is confidence. So if you can look at the things you do as part of two feedback loops, if you will. So you're displaying competency. So you've got the objective feedback that it's working or you've done it. It's enjoyable and you're going to want to do it again. So confidence is also linked to motivation. But the flip side is also true. So if you do the opposite and it's incompetence, doing something and not getting a return on investment, it's kind of frustrating. It's not kind of frustrating, it is frustrating. And if something's frustrating, you're probably not going to want to do it again unless you're hyper fixated on it and you're like, no, this isn't going to get the better of me. But again, there is a life cycle on that. And I think that's where we're at with a lot of training, where if we look at...
That's weightlifting.
Yeah. While we're...
Just do it for longer. Just snap out of it. Just suck it up.
Yeah.
It's just a grind. It's like, well, I haven't had a hit of dopamine doing this shit for about 6 months or the last time I PB'd, because every time I do something, my coach just says, do it again, but like less shit, or do it again better. Or yeah, but like, you're not that guy. You're not that guy. And to be honest, they weren't that guy either.
And if we segue or just jump across from weightlifting to sports performance, and we think about the short term, but we don't realize we're thinking about the short term. Starting off with things like trap bar deadlifts, never learning to front rack a bar, not bringing your arms fully overhead, you have lowered the ceiling so much in terms of what you can do in future. I'll spend a lot of time with my field athletes at the start, just learning how to front rack a barbell. And I mean actually front racking a barbell, not crossing your arms across your shoulder, but actually front racking a barbell, because that opens up a whole new world for them. If you can front rack, you can front squat. If you can front rack, you can push press. You can learn the jerk variations. You can clean. You can just hold a fucking heavy ass barbell in that front rack. And that's also another one of the reasons that I do those heavy partials from pins, because the load just gets people into positions. And use the tools that you have at your disposal to get what you want, and think about those longer term things. So if we look at Shmerkin couldn't front rack more less than 240, was it? Something crazy like that.
Something
He needed 240 kilos. And you're not Shmerkin, but maybe it's 140 kilos for you. And that's going to feel like it's shortening you by the second the first time you put 140 kilos on your frame. I still vividly remember the first time I put 140 kilos on my frame. I thought I got 6 inches shorter. So if we look at what the traditional strength and conditioning model leads us to, we will see athletes on rowing machines who can't row. They can't deadlift, they can't press overhead, they can't front rack a barbell, and yet still they will put a barbell on their back to try back squat.
Box squat.
And it's box squats as well, which are horrendous as well. That's one exercise that I think is just a terrible idea.
Well, I saw Bill Hartman do box squats with a safety bar, so I'm just... if the smartest person on earth is going to do them, a very smart person is going to do them. But yeah, it doesn't mean dumb people can do them too. It's a different beast. It's a different world.
Yeah, I think that I reckon there's some. We'll finish on this one then. The
I
box
was going
one.
to say, do you need to rest your brain?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It just goes a million miles an hour. I don't like it, but I love
I
it as well.
fucking
Like
love it.
it's got its pros and cons. But the box squat, there's like I've thought about this a lot. I have a video that I haven't put out. It's pretty much ready. It just needs a fucking voiceover. But if we think about why we're using box squats, it's usually because people can't squat to depth, or we're looking to add
We're
more
scared
load.
of it.
Yeah, whatever. So we've got two reasons: performance or safety. Performance, you can get more by overcoming from pins or blocks than you will from a box. Much, much more. And then if you want to work for speed, just let your fucking brain determine what depth it wants to squat to. So as you add load or speed, maybe you travel through less range of motion, but who the fuck cares? Then if we think about safety, just YouTube box squat fails. You will get great entertainment at other people's expense. The box squat just doesn't make sense to me. You also have to push your hips way further back as well. When I'm squatting, I'm thinking up, down. I'm not thinking back. If I'm thinking back, I'm going to use a hinge. So
Is that your piano in the back?
It's Mam's.
I was going to say, if you could play that, that would be pretty dope, but that's all good.
I haven't got a musical bone in my body.
That's all right. You got it. It's working on other things. It's working on other things for you, coach.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, well, it's very funny that so Mam is in music now, but it's coaching, but it's music coaching essentially. And I'm like, it's all the fucking same. Like,
Everything's the same. SpongeBob. Everything's the
that's
same.
That's it. I swear, and that's the thing that I keep going back to. Every single thing is the same. There's going to be more similarities between things than things that aren't similar. I'll pick up a book and I'm like, fuck, this is a coaching book, but it's about fucking money, or it's about art, or it's about something. I'm like, oh my God, why does everything have to be about training? But it's not. It's just about the human experience, I think. And you can apply, as contradictory as this sounds, the solutions are going to be more similar. The principles will align. It's like,
it's a sign of good principles.
Yeah. Bank account, your bank account analogy for training. You've got a certain amount of training capital, or adaptation currency, as Evan Pagan coined it. So you've got a certain amount of adaptation currency. No matter what bank account in the world, there's still a zero. So everybody's just playing with a different bank balance. Prescribing exercises and training. So you've got a reason to prescribe it. You've got the type of drug you're using. You got the dose. You got to worry about the half-life in terms of frequency. You got to worry about contraindications, interaction effects, and so on. It's all the same. So
it's all the same.
Yeah.
Where can people find you, Cian? Where can people find and learn more about what you do?
Cian O Brien on Instagram is probably the best bet. That's CIAN 0BRIEN. I realize now.
Irish spelling. You should put it in your bio. Pronounce Cian.
Yeah, like usually get Sean.
Oh, fuck.
My iPhone and my headphones call me connected to Sean's iPhone or whatever. I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. Anything else there? What it was? Can't remember what it was though. That's the other thing. So with the ADHD and kind of self-doubt,
what did I just say? It's like, yeah. What do we talk about? We talked about nothing we planned on talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like someone who's like really high. They're in the middle of a sentence and then just forget they're talking and they don't know what they're talking about and they just stop. That's me normally. As part of the ADHD assessment, I've always been racked with self-doubt, and it comes in waves as well. I had a really bad wave this year as well. I think I'm doing international seminars now, who the fuck am I to be doing international seminars? All that stuff, being in contact with like you, Angus, Chris, Matt. I'm like, why am I here? All these questions. And then looking back on my experiences as a student in sports science and not buying in, and then my effort reflected that as well. So I wasn't a traditionally good student. So I was like, well, I have the evidence to say that I'm not who I say I am in some senses. But then when I did the ADHD assessment, it gave me the evidence I needed to refute that, because while my working memory is the bottom tier, I mean the bottom tier, it shocked me how bad it was. Once you get rid of those things that are seen in ADHD, some of the other things like abstract logical reasoning and verbal comprehension, all of those were through the roof and in the top percentiles. And I was like, that makes sense. So I do know what I'm talking about. And yeah, I think I'm thankful for ADHD in the sense that it's allowed me to have the volume of thoughts I do, and the fact that I can't switch off my brain. And I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking about fucking training, and I go to bed and I can't sleep because I got a fucking stupid aha moment about some stupid thing. And it could be just as simple as the sequencing of exercises. And that's also something people can play around with. That's a source of variation that can be very useful. Just switch the order of your sessions. I'll probably get more from moving away from slow to fast and fast to slow soon. I hope to. And I think that's just the emphasis approach. So if I get to a stage where the things that I need to emphasize now are where they should be for the things I can currently do, I'll be able to do those things. And my priority, or what I need to emphasize, will be those slower stuff. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
That was dope, Coach. That was amazing. This is probably going to be the best podcast I'm definitely going to do for a long time, until we do another one together. Thank you so much for listening, guys. And if you enjoyed it, feel free to share it on your socials. Thanks, Cian.
Anytime.